Hey guys, Nike here. Some of you might be aware that I was pretty supremely disappointed that ANET didn't release Wing 6 with the last Living Story episode. Quite frankly, the release cadence of raids is unacceptable and really alarming to me for the future of the game. It's really hard to envision ANET hitting a raid wing per 6-month cadence, based on their history, which is what I would consider to be the minimum speed needed to keep the raid community committed to the game. Well, anyway, enough of that. For the last 2 weeks or so, I've been playing Guild Wars 1 again, and enjoying myself quite a bit. I've been focusing on hard mode dungeons, Fissure of Woe, and the parts of DOA that I remember. Not playing hardcore speed clears or solos, pretty much just balanced way with heroes. I also finished Winds of Change hard mode, which is sort of what really inspired me to make this video. ANET did a few things really well with Guild Wars 1 that they didn't do with Guild Wars 2's design, and it's highly detrimental to Guild Wars 2. I'd like to take some time to point things out that I feel ANET did correctly with Guild Wars 1 and that they missed the boat a little bit with on Guild Wars 2. First, Guild Wars 1 PvE endgame content has two really good aspects to it, in that it can be played in 3 different ways. The same instance can be played 3 different ways. Many of the instances, the dungeons, the elite zones, can be soloed, or you can casually clear them with heroes, or you can speed clear them with an all-human full team. The benefit of this is that it embraces multiple playstyles within the same content, and you are never truly left out of content. With Guild Wars 2, you must group with other people to complete the content. If you are a hardcore raider and you want to raid, you either have to play with a static group or with pugs. The static group is great, but what if you want to raid at 3 a.m. and your guild raid is at 7 p.m.? Well, then your only option is to pug. But as we all know, pugging can be both frustrating and pointless. In Guild Wars 1, you're never truly locked out of the content. On a personal level, this is a big deal for me as a streamer, because in Guild Wars 2 PvE, I'm rather limited by what I can stream and when. I'm a bit envious of PvP streamers because they can just solo queue all day. If they wake up at 3 in the morning and they want to stream some solo queues, they can go ahead and do it. If it's 3 in the afternoon and they want to stream solo queues, they can go ahead and do it. In Guild Wars 2, I can only really stream raids when my static raid group is ready to raid, and we're not going for a record, because obviously no one's going to stream that. So really, I'm very limited by what I can stream. The flip side of that is in Guild Wars 1, I could get bored and fire my stream up at 3 a.m. and jump right into content. Obviously, 99% of people don't have this same issue, but I think it just reinforces the point I was making before about the availability of content. In a lot of ways, Guild Wars 1 content might be actually less accessible than Guild Wars 2 content at the end game, but it's way more available. Secondly, Guild Wars 1 content is repeatable, and the rewards don't diminish unless you're farming a group of mobs over and over again. I could clear the same dungeon multiple times per day and be rewarded for it each time. There is no daily cap, and there is no weekly cap. I understand, for a lot of reasons, why ANET changed that in Guild Wars 2, and it really has to do with the rewards. In Guild Wars 2, Liquid Gold is the main reward of dungeons and raids, and to a lesser extent fractals. In Guild Wars 1, the main reward of instances is the chance to get a rare lottery skin out of the end chest. The chances of that are so low, and the time to clear Guild Wars 1 instances is so relatively long, that they don't really have a problem with you clearing them on repeat all day, every day, because it doesn't have very much chance of upsetting the economy. In Guild Wars 2, if you were able to repeat the fastest dungeon paths endlessly all day and get the same amount of liquid gold, it would indeed create big problems. I understand why that is, but nonetheless, the Guild Wars 1 model feels more rewarding to the hardcore player base. Casual raiders in Guild Wars 2 clear raids once per week. A hardcore raider might clear 5 or more times per week. For a casual player, Guild Wars 2 raids feel significantly more rewarding than Guild Wars 1 instances. For a hardcore player, Guild Wars 1 feels significantly more rewarding. This brings me to the crux of ANET's logic. In a very real way, the reward structure in Guild Wars 2 is set up to discourage you from playing more than a certain amount of hours per week or per day of endgame content. Let's say, hypothetically, that number is 4 hours per day. This means that a guy who plays 4 hours per day will be on the same level of rewards as a guy who plays for 12, but way more advanced than a person who plays only 2. Essentially, ANET has engineered how much time they want you to devote to the endgame instance content of Guild Wars 2. They're saying, we're going to reward you up to 4 hours, but after that, you're not going to get a lot of rewards, so play something else. In Guild Wars 1, there's no limit, and the more you play, the more the wealth gap opens up. This is why veteran speed clearers in Guild Wars 1 are astronomically wealthy in-game relative to hardcore raiders in Guild Wars 2. Obviously, if you only play 4 hours per day or less, you probably feel that ANET made the right call with this in Guild Wars 2. If you play more than that in Guild Wars 2, you probably feel they didn't. So I understand that this is a very personal position to take one way or the other. And of course, I understand exactly why ANET made the decision they made in Guild Wars 2, and its mass appeal. Once you play Guild Wars 1 in-game PvE for a little bit, you can see how very little mass appeal it has. And I mean that in the most positive way possible. The game is not for quote-unquote casual shitters. If you are bad, or you are not using good builds, hard mode dungeons or elite zones will chew you up and spit you out. Hell, even Winds of Change, which was essentially living story chapters for Guild Wars 1, was incredibly hard from a casual perspective, especially hard mode. Guild Wars 1 had no qualms about letting you fail and not letting you succeed until you got good. I think the sort of people who watch my videos probably appreciate that to a large degree. But I think even the most hardcore player understands that's not great for companies' revenue. ANET's design philosophy for Guild Wars 2 is so evidently biased towards setting the difficulty bar so low that even the most mentally or physically incapable player can still succeed. For those unaware, one example would be a recent story instance where you fought a boss, and if you died, you immediately got rezzed and teleported back into his room, and his health didn't regenerate. Since there's no death penalty, players could res rush him for hours if need be, and many did just that, and then promptly ran to Reddit to complain about the high difficulty level. Compare that to Guild Wars 1 Winds of Change hard mode, which had some instances that were crushingly brutal in difficulty, and if you didn't specifically tailor your build and comp for that particular instance, you could never succeed. So which of those two models is going to make the most money? Obviously, I think we know the answer. As much as we might decry it, we can't fault ANET for making the choice they made. In fact, we should probably be happy that ANET actually created raids, especially challenge mode raids, that are legitimately tough content at all. Creating content with a relatively high skill requirement and not letting people succeed until they hit that bar was a huge step for Guild Wars 2 design, and is to this day still quite controversial in the awful player community, judging by a lot of forum posts. As far as the content itself goes, Guild Wars 1 did a few things really right. Assuming you weren't speedrunning and were clearing mobs normally, fighting them all, trash mobs were the main challenge of the instances. The big difficulty were the super nasty, powerful mob packs and crisscrossing patrols. How you approached each room and each mob pull was crucially important to your success. That said, the bosses themselves were fairly poor designed in general. There were some well-designed boss fights in Guild Wars 1, especially Doom, but by and large, most instances, the bosses were simply normal mobs with much higher hit points and a few unique and powerful spells. Their main challenge was bringing the right skills in your comp, rather than having mechanics that required reactive gameplay. I don't want to sound like I'm dissing Guild Wars 1 here, because 99.9% of the instances were based around the difficulty of the trash fights, and those trash fights are incredibly superior to any Guild Wars 2 trash fights. Guild Wars 1 boss design, for the most part, simply reflects an older game where raid bosses and mechanics as we know them today weren't really innovated yet and weren't able to be implemented. In Guild Wars 2, stealth from thieves, or to a lesser extent mesmers, rendered any trash fights trivial and for the most part eliminated the difficulty of trash mobs in vanilla dungeons. This is also why, for example, in modern Guild Wars 2 content, Fractals and Raids, trash fights are kept to a bare minimum and bosses are the main event. Simply put, Guild Wars 2 is playing to its strengths, which is boss design. I think the Guild Wars 1 model of exploring an instance, seeing a room full of trash mobs, recognizing you can't rush in headlong and kill everything, forced players to think about their strategy and tactics and their approach. In Guild Wars 2, people are more concerned with their rotation and the execution of the quality of their gameplay and precision of their key presses. The tactics to a boss fight are almost irrelevant in Guild Wars 2 because everyone in the group is on the same page and the tactics are well refined by the community. In Guild Wars 1, on the other hand, execution and quality of the gameplay are important, of course, but significantly less so than the approach you take in the first place in your tactics and your build and team comp. It might be an overstatement, but Guild Wars 1 is definitely more suited to a slower-paced, thoughtful approach compared to Guild Wars 2's faster-paced Twitch gameplay. Again, which one you prefer is subjective. Most people who love Guild Wars 2 love it because of the combat system. They love the reactive gameplay and the twitchy aspect to the action combat. So it's not cut and dry that one is better, since they each have different strengths and appeal to different skill sets. Lastly, regarding the content, Guild Wars 1 has endgame instances, dungeons, and elite zones, and Guild Wars 2 has raids and fractals. This content is meant to satisfy the endgame PvE players in each community on the quote-unquote hardcore level, or at least the skilled level. What Guild Wars 1 really lacks, that Guild Wars 2 does not, is a satisfying endgame for low-skill casual players. A great many Guild Wars 2 players don't set foot in raids or fractals. They log in, fight a zero-skill required world boss or two in an open-world Zerg, talk in guild chat, do a couple meta events, do some open world stuff, and then they log out. Having an open world with things to do in it for casual players, whether it be world bosses, meta event farms, gathering, etc., gives your average non-hardcore player something to do at endgame that doesn't necessarily feel grindy. This is Guild Wars 1's big failure, and the endgame for casual PvEers is getting points for your Hall of Monuments, really, which is incredibly grindy. There's no open world per se, and thus the game doesn't have that social aspect that a casual player would want, nor is there like a world boss or a meta event to participate in. I could easily see a casual player logging into Guild Wars 1, looking at his screen, wondering what to do after he finished the story. Maybe he tries a dungeon, gets decimated by the first group of mobs, takes a long time to defeat those trash mobs after many fails, and then repeats that process on the second group of mobs, realizes that he still has 50 more groups of mobs before the dungeon's cleared, and then logs out never to try a dungeon again. There just isn't the vast array of endgame casual content that Guild Wars 2 has, and that is a huge moneymaker for Guild Wars 2, and that's just missing in Guild Wars 1. That right there explains why they rushed Guild Wars 2 out so fast, and why they ended development so quickly of Guild Wars 1. You can't run an MMO these days now without money from casual PvEers. If your game cannot retain casual PvEers, you are doomed. Ask WildStar. All in all, Guild Wars 1 succeeded at providing very well produced, very rewarding endgame and a very rewarding endgame PvE experience for dedicated hardcore players. That is what it did absolutely better than what Guild Wars 2 has done. Its main failure was that it was unable to provide a similar experience to casuals, which cost them a lot of money and in the end shortened the development lifespan of the game. So that's it, guys. I could go into a lot more depth and talk about rather minute topics at a very granular level, but this video's gone on kind of long enough. I hope I gave you guys something to think about and maybe even encourage a few of you to give Guild Wars 1 another playthrough or pick it up from scratch, especially if you are the sort who is into hardcore endgame PvE, because there actually is quite a bit of it there for you in Guild Wars 1. Thank you, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.